15 years, that's how long we had been married. A decade and a half filled with milestones, memories, and the kind of love I thought was unshakable. We built a life together, shared our dreams, raised two beautiful kids, and created what I believed was a bond strong enough to weather any storm. But looking back now, I see how blind I had been, how much I missed the signs that something wasn't right. It didn't happen all at once. There wasn't a dramatic moment where I suddenly realized our marriage was slipping through my fingers. It was more subtle than that. A growing unease that crept into my mind and refused to leave. At first, I ignored it. After all, everyone goes through rough patches, right? That's what I told myself. Work had been stressful for both of us. The kids were growing older and more demanding, and life just seemed busier than ever. I assumed the distance I felt between us was a natural consequence of all that. But then there were the little things. The things I couldn't ignore. She started spending more time on her phone, her screen lighting up with messages she always seemed too quick to hide. If I asked her about it, she'd brush me off with a casual excuse, a work email, a text from a friend, nothing important. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to trust her. But the nagging feeling in my chest told me something wasn't adding up. Her behavior changed in other ways too. She became more self-conscious about her appearance, which wasn't necessarily a bad thing, but it was sudden and out of character. She bought new clothes, started wearing makeup more often, and joined a gym, all under the guise of wanting to feel better about herself. I supported her, of course, because I wanted her to be happy. But it was hard not to notice how much effort she was putting into looking good when she hadn't seemed to care much about it before. It wasn't just the physical changes, though. It was how distant she became emotionally. The conversations we used to have, the ones where we talked about everything and nothing, were replaced by awkward silences or surface-level exchanges. She stopped laughing at my jokes, stopped asking me about my day, stopped sharing the little details of hers. It felt like she was there in the same room, but a million miles away. I started to question myself. Was I doing something wrong? Had I failed her as a husband? I replayed every argument we'd ever had, every mistake I'd ever made, searching for a reason why she seemed to be pulling away. I tried harder to connect with her, to remind her of the life we'd built together. I planned date nights, left little notes for her, and even surprised her with a weekend getaway. She went along with it, but her enthusiasm felt forced, like she was doing it out of obligation rather than genuine desire. The turning point came one evening when she was in the shower and her phone buzzed on the nightstand. I wouldn't have normally invaded her privacy, but something about the way she had guarded that phone lately made my curiosity get the better of me. I picked it up and saw a notification from someone named Jake. My heart stopped. I didn't recognize the name, and the message preview didn't help ease my suspicion. Her daughter named Jake. She was 9 years old. She went to preschool north of her town, and she had been sleeping alone in the room next door. It was short, casual, and vague, something about looking forward to seeing her again. I put the phone back before she could catch me, but the seed of doubt had already taken root. I couldn't let it go. Over the next few weeks, I started to notice patterns. Late nights working, new lingerie she never wore for me, and a constant need to check her phone, even during family dinners. It wasn't paranoia. It was a growing certainty that my wife was hiding something from me. I confided in a close friend, someone I trusted to give me an honest perspective. They suggested I talk to her directly, but I wasn't ready for that. I needed more than suspicions. I needed proof. So I started paying closer attention. I checked our bank statements and found charges I couldn't explain. Fancy restaurants, hotel bookings, and gifts that I had never seen. I felt sick to my stomach, but I kept digging because I had to know the truth. The final blow came when I followed her one evening after she said she was going to a work dinner. I waited until she left, then drove a few minutes behind her, keeping my distance. She didn't go to a restaurant near her office as she had claimed. Instead, she pulled into the parking lot of a small boutique hotel. I sat there in my car, watching as she got out and greeted a man I instantly recognized. It was my brother. The betrayal hit me like a freight train. My wife and my brother. Two people I loved and trusted more than anyone else in the world. My hands trembled on the steering wheel and my chest felt like it was going to explode. I wanted to storm in there, confront them both, and demand answers, but I didn't. I stayed in my car, frozen with a mix of anger, pain, and disbelief. When I finally drove home that night, I couldn't think straight. Every moment of our marriage replayed in my mind, now tainted by the knowledge of her infidelity. Every smile, every kiss, every promise suddenly felt like a lie. I lay awake all night, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I had missed the signs and how I could ever move forward from this. The next morning, I acted as if nothing had happened. She came home late, offering some half-hearted excuse about the dinner running long, and I just nodded, pretending to believe her. But inside, something had shifted. The love I once felt for her was now overshadowed by the betrayal, and I knew I could never look at her the same way again. She was a lie to us in every way, and I knew I could never look at her the same way again. That was the moment I decided I wouldn't let her destroy me. I wouldn't let her lies define my life. If she thought she could live a double life without consequences, she was wrong. I didn't know exactly how I was going to handle it yet, but one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. The day I found out the full extent of their betrayal was the day my world shattered. It wasn't just the infidelity, though that was devastating enough. It was the person she chose to betray me with that made it feel like a knife twisting in my back. My brother, my own flesh and blood, had been secretly involved with my wife. The realization hit me like a tidal wave, leaving me gasping for air. I couldn't believe it at first. I didn't want to believe it. This was my brother, someone I had grown up with, shared countless memories with, and trusted implicitly. We weren't just brothers, we were close friends. I had always looked out for him, and I thought he would do the same for me. How wrong I was. The evidence was undeniable. Their secret relationship wasn't just a fleeting mistake or a moment of poor judgment. It was calculated and deliberate. I found messages between them, hundreds of them, hidden in a folder on her phone. They weren't just exchanging casual flirtations. They were sharing intimate details, making plans to meet, and expressing emotions that should have been reserved for me. Every word felt like a dagger to my chest. As I scrolled through the messages, my emotions swung wildly between rage and heartbreak. There were times when I wanted to throw the phone across the room, but I forced myself to keep reading. I needed to see it all, to confront the full scope of what they had done. It wasn't just about knowing. It was about understanding how long this had been going on and how deeply they had betrayed me. The messages revealed that this wasn't new. Their affair had been going on for months, possibly even longer. They had been meeting in secret, laughing behind my back, and building a relationship while I was obliviously carrying on with our life. They'd even used family gatherings as opportunities to be together. The sheer audacity of it made my blood boil. But what hurt the most was the realization that my brother, someone who should have been my ally, had been complicit in this betrayal. He knew what he was doing. He knew the pain it would cause me, and yet he did it anyway. I thought about all the times I had invited him into my home, all the dinners we had shared, and all the moments when he had looked me in the eye and pretended everything was normal. The thought made me sick. It wasn't just about what they had done, it was about what it said about them as people. My wife, the woman I had vowed to spend my life with, had chosen to destroy our marriage for a selfish, fleeting affair. And my brother, someone I had always believed would have my back, had chosen to betray me in the most personal way imaginable. I felt humiliated. Betrayal is one thing, but when it comes from the people you trust most, it cuts deeper than you ever thought possible. I couldn't stop replaying every moment in my mind, questioning whether there had been signs I had missed. Had there been a glance exchanged between them at a family barbecue, a suspicious excuse that I had brushed aside? I realized how naive I had been, how much I had trusted them both without question. What made it worse was the knowledge that they had probably laughed at my expense. Every time I had expressed love for my wife or talked about how proud I was of my family, They must have felt a twisted sense of superiority. They were playing their game, thinking I would never find out. The arrogance of it all was infuriating. I kept thinking about my kids. How could I protect them from this? How could I shield them from the fallout of their mother's actions and the damage it would inevitably cause? They adored their uncle, and the thought of them learning the truth made my heart ache. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about my family, my children, and the life we had built together. As I pieced everything together, I felt a sense of numbness wash over me. The initial shock had faded, replaced by a cold, calculated clarity. I wasn't going to let them destroy me. I wasn't going to let their betrayal define my life. They had made their choices, and now they were going to face the consequences. But I didn't act immediately. I needed time to process everything, to figure out the best way to handle the situation. Part of me wanted to confront them both right away, to unleash all the anger and hurt I was feeling, but another part of me knew that I needed to be strategic. This wasn't just about venting my emotions. It was about taking control of the situation and ensuring they couldn't weasel their way out of it. I started collecting evidence. I made copies of the messages, took screenshots of the incriminating photos, and documented everything I could. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it all yet, but I knew I needed to be prepared. I wasn't going to give them the chance to deny what they had done. My task was to set the stage for evidence while they tried their best to deny what I had done. Now, I had my witnesses. At the same time, I started distancing myself emotionally. It was difficult, but it was necessary. I stopped engaging with my wife in the way I used to. I stopped asking her about her day, stopped sharing my thoughts with her, and stopped seeking her affection. Every interaction felt like a performance, a charade I was forced to endure until I was ready to confront her. With my brother, it was even harder. I couldn't bring myself to look at him without feeling a surge of anger and betrayal. I avoided him whenever possible, making excuses to stay away from family events where he would be present. I didn't trust myself to keep my emotions in check if I saw him. The days and weeks that followed were some of the darkest of my life. I felt like I was living in a nightmare, trapped in a situation I couldn't escape. But amidst the pain, there was a growing sense of determination. I wasn't going to let them win. They had taken so much from me already, but I wasn't going to let them take my dignity or my future. In the quiet moments when I was alone with my thoughts, I started to plan my next steps. I didn't want revenge for the sake of revenge. I wanted justice. I wanted them to understand the gravity of what they had done and to face the consequences of their actions. And more than anything, I wanted to take back control of my life. The betrayal had left a scar, one that would never fully heal. But I knew that I had the strength to move forward. They had underestimated me, thinking I would never find out or that I would be too weak to stand up for myself. They were wrong. The moment I decided to take control, a strange sense of calm came over me. It wasn't the calm of acceptance, but the kind that comes before a storm. I knew I couldn't let my anger consume me outright. It would only cloud my judgment. Instead, I turned my focus to planning. If they thought they could humiliate me, if they thought they could destroy my life and walk away unscathed, they had no idea who they were dealing with. I started by keeping up the facade. My wife had no clue that I knew the truth, and I used that to my advantage. Every time she smiled at me or pretended to care about our life together, I felt the sharp sting of betrayal. But I didn't let it show. I acted normal, maybe even more attentive than usual, just to keep her off guard. She didn't deserve my kindness, but I wasn't being kind for her sake. I was playing the long game, and if that meant pretending, so be it. I also made a point to interact with my brother as if nothing had changed. It was one of the hardest parts of my plan. Every time I saw him, every time I heard his voice, I wanted to confront him, to demand an explanation for what he had done. But I bit my tongue and kept my composure. He was probably confident that I was still in the dark, and I wanted him to stay that way. The element of surprise was crucial to what I was planning. The first step was gathering evidence. I had already saved the messages and photos I'd found, but I needed more. I started paying attention to her behavior, noting every suspicious move she made. When she left the house, I made a mental note of where she said she was going and how long she'd be gone. I checked her phone whenever I had the chance, taking screenshots of anything incriminating and emailing them to myself. I didn't feel guilty about invading her privacy. She had forfeited her right to privacy the moment she betrayed me. I also began tracking her movements. It wasn't hard to do considering how predictable she had become. She always used the same excuses, working late, meeting up with friends, running errands. I had followed her a few times, careful to stay out of sight. Watching her meet my brother in secret was like pouring salt on an open wound, but it solidified my resolve. My next move was to reach out to my brother's wife. It wasn't an easy decision, but I knew she deserved to know the truth. She had been nothing but kind to me over the years, and the thought of her being blindsided by his betrayal was unbearable. I wasn't sure how she would react, but I hoped she would be willing to work with me. When I showed her the evidence, her reaction was a mix of shock and devastation. She broke down in tears, and for a moment I felt guilty for being the one to deliver such painful news. But she needed to know, just as I had needed to know. Once she composed herself, we started talking about what to do next. She was angry, hurt, and determined to make them pay for what they had done to both of us. Together we devised a plan. It wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake, it was about holding them accountable. We decided that the best way to confront them was to do it in a way they couldn't escape or deny. My wife and my brother had chosen to betray us both, so it only felt right that we confront them together. As the day of reckoning approached, I focused on getting everything in order. I packed my wife's bags, carefully folding her clothes and placing them in suitcases. I didn't want to be accused of being irrational or impulsive. I wanted her to see that I had thought this through. I changed the locks on the house, ensuring she wouldn't have access after the confrontation. Every action I took was deliberate, calculated, and designed to show her that I wasn't going to tolerate her behavior any longer. This was when the day finally arrived. My wife told me she was going out for the evening, claiming she was meeting some friends for dinner. I played along, wishing her a good time, and even complimenting her on how nice she looked. She smiled at me, completely unaware that her world was about to come crashing down. I followed her to the restaurant, parking a safe distance away. My brother was already there, waiting for her. They greeted each other with a level of familiarity that made my stomach turn. Watching them laugh and flirt as if they had nothing to hide filled me with rage, but I kept my composure. I wasn't going to let my emotions ruin the plan. My mom was staring so hard at her brother. I was glad she was focused on her dinner. My brother's wife was already inside, sitting at a table where she could see them clearly. She had brought a set of divorce papers for both of them, a symbolic gesture to show them that their actions had real consequences. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. This was her moment, and I trusted her to handle it. After she confronted them, I left the restaurant and went home. I didn't need to hear their excuses or their attempts to justify what they had done. They had made their choices, and now they had to live with them. When my wife returned later that night, she found her bags waiting for her on the porch, and the locks changed. I didn't give her the satisfaction of a face-to-face confrontation. I left a simple note on the door. You chose this. Now live with it. It wasn't dramatic, but it was enough. She knew exactly what it meant. I blocked her number and refused to engage with her any further. My focus was on moving forward, not dwelling on the past. In the end, my plan worked exactly as I had hoped. My wife and my brother were exposed for who they really were, and their actions had consequences they couldn't escape. It didn't erase the pain they had caused me, but it gave me a sense of closure and control. They had underestimated me, thinking I would never find out, or that I wouldn't have the strength to stand up for myself. They were wrong. When my wife walked up to the house that night and found her suitcases neatly packed and waiting on the porch, it was a moment of finality that I had carefully orchestrated. I didn't need to see her reaction to know how it would unfold. The shock, the confusion, the realization, all of it would hit her like a freight train. It wasn't just about ending her marriage. It was about making her understand the depth of the betrayal and ensuring she couldn't twist the narrative into something it wasn't. I stayed inside, watching from the window as she stood frozen in front of the door, staring at the bags. She looked down at the note I had taped to the door, and even from a distance, I could see her posture change. The confidence she'd left the house with earlier was gone, replaced by uncertainty and panic. She tried the doorknob, rattling it when it didn't open, and then knocked, calling my name. I didn't answer. This wasn't a moment for explanations or apologies. She knew exactly why this was happening. I had already blocked her number, ensuring there would be no desperate texts or tearful calls. Whatever she needed to say, she'd have to figure it out without me. I'd spent too long giving her the benefit of the doubt, trusting her when she didn't deserve it, and putting her needs above my own. That time was over. Ilse said, as I watched her leave, dragging her suitcases behind her, I felt an odd mix of emotions. There was relief, knowing I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my life. But there was also an ache that lingered, a reminder of everything we had shared and lost. 15 years of marriage couldn't be erased overnight, no matter how deep the betrayal ran. The days that followed were strange and unsettling. For the first time in years, the house was quiet, almost eerily so. Her presence, which had once felt like the foundation of my life, was now a ghost that haunted the empty spaces. I'd find myself reaching for my phone to text her about something mundane, only to remember that she wasn't a part of my life anymore. The habit of her was hard to break, but I knew it was necessary. I spent hours thinking about the life we had built together and how easily it had crumbled. The love we had shared, or at least what I thought was love, had been replaced by lies and deceit. I questioned everything. How much of our marriage had been real, and how much had been a performance on her part? Had she ever truly loved me, or had she simply been going through the motions? These questions kept me awake at night, gnawing at the edges of my mind. My thoughts inevitably turned to my brother. The betrayal from him cut just as deep, if not deeper, than the one from my wife. He wasn't just my brother. He had been my friend, someone I had trusted implicitly. Growing up, we had been inseparable, sharing secrets and dreams, always looking out for each other. That bond, which I had once thought unbreakable, now felt like a cruel joke. I found myself replaying memories of our childhood, searching for clues that might explain how he had become the kind of person who could do this to me. Had I missed something along the way? Was there some flaw in our relationship that I had overlooked? Or was this simply who he had always been, and I had been too blind to see it? These questions were just as painful as the ones about my wife, and they left me feeling hollow. But amidst the pain, there was a growing sense of resolve. I couldn't let their actions define me or dictate the rest of my life. They had already taken so much from me, but I wasn't going to let them take my future. I knew I had to start rebuilding, piece by piece, even if I wasn't sure where to begin. One of the first steps I took was seeking support from people I could trust. I reached out to close friends and family members, sharing the truth about what had happened. It wasn't easy to open up about something so personal and painful, but their support was invaluable. They reminded me that I wasn't alone, that I had people who cared about me and wanted to see me heal. I also started focusing on myself for the first time in years. My marriage had consumed so much of my energy and attention that I had lost sight of who I was as an individual. I began rediscovering old hobbies, picking up books I had meant to read and spending time outdoors. These small acts of self-care felt like a lifeline, pulling me out of the darkness and giving me something to hold on to. Despite the progress I was making, there were still moments of doubt and pain. Late at night, when the house was quiet and the weight of everything felt overwhelming, I'd find myself questioning whether I had done the right thing. Could our marriage have been salvaged if I had confronted her sooner? Was there any part of our relationship worth saving? These thoughts were hard to shake, but I reminded myself that the decision I had made was the only one that honored my self-respect and dignity. The fallout from the confrontation at the restaurant was swift and brutal. My brother's wife had followed through with her plan, serving him divorce papers in front of my wife. I didn't witness the scene firsthand, but she called me afterward to let me know how it had gone. According to her, their faces had been a mix of shock and embarrassment, completely unprepared for the consequences of their actions. Hearing about their reaction brought me a sense of satisfaction, though it didn't erase the pain they had caused. Knowing they were finally facing the consequences of their betrayal was enough for now. They had spent so much time lying and scheming, thinking they could get away with it, but reality had caught up with them. As the days turned into weeks, I began to feel a sense of liberation. The weight of their betrayal was still there, but it no longer consumed me. I had taken control of my life, made decisions that honored my worth, and started laying the groundwork for a future free from their toxicity. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Healing from something like this takes time, and there would be moments when the pain would resurface. But I also knew that I was stronger than I had given myself credit for. I had faced the worst betrayal imaginable and come out on the other side, ready to rebuild and move forward. Scars they had left would always be a part of me, but they didn't define me. I was more than their betrayal, more than their lies. I was a survivor, and I was determined to create a life that reflected my resilience and strength. Their choices had ended one chapter of my life, but a new one was beginning, and this time, it was entirely on my terms. Moving on from the wreckage of what had once been my life was not as simple as locking the door behind me. The memories clung to me like shadows, reminders of what had been and what had been lost. Each day was a battle to piece together the fragments of my identity that had been shattered by betrayal. Yet with every step forward, I felt a small, flickering sense of freedom, as though I was finally shedding the weight of their deceit. The first few weeks were the hardest. Waking up alone in the house we had shared for so many years felt surreal. It was as if her presence still lingered in the walls and the spaces she used to occupy. But I forced myself to face the silence, to confront the emptiness instead of running from it. I knew this was part of the healing process, as painful as it was. I threw myself into rebuilding my life, starting with the small things. I changed the furniture arrangements, painted the walls, and replaced the photos that had once been a testament to our life together. It was a strange mix of catharsis and mourning, acknowledging what had been while creating space for something new. Each change felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, a way of saying, "This is mine now, not ours." Work became both a refuge and a challenge. It was comforting to have a routine, a sense of purpose beyond my personal struggles. But even there, reminders of what had happened would creep in. Colleagues would ask how I was doing, their pity thinly veiled behind polite concern. It was exhausting to navigate those conversations, but I learned to deflect, to focus on the future instead of dwelling on the past. One thing that surprised me was the support I received from unexpected places. Old friends I hadn't spoken to in years reached out when they heard what had happened. Their kindness reminded me that even in the darkest times, there were people who cared. I began reconnecting with them, rebuilding relationships that had fallen by the wayside during my marriage. It was a bittersweet reminder of how much I had sacrificed for a relationship that ultimately wasn't worth it. The worst thing is, it was a bittersweet reminder of how much I had sacrificed for a relationship that ultimately wasn't worth it. Therapy became another lifeline. At first, I was hesitant to open up to a stranger, but it quickly became clear how much I needed it. Talking through my feelings, unpacking the layers of betrayal and grief, helped me make sense of everything. My therapist helped me see that what had happened wasn't a reflection of my worth, but a testament to their lack of integrity. It was a hard truth to accept, but it was also liberating. Over time, I began to rediscover parts of myself that had been buried under the weight of my marriage. Hobbies I had once loved but abandoned for the sake of our relationship slowly found their way back into my life. I started running again, feeling the tension and anger melt away with each mile. I picked up my guitar, letting music become an outlet for emotions I couldn't put into words. These small acts of self-care felt like acts of rebellion against the person I had become in that toxic relationship. One of the most challenging aspects of moving forward was the lingering anger. It wasn't just directed at them, but also at myself. I blamed myself for not seeing the signs, for trusting too easily, for not confronting the truth sooner. That self-directed anger was the hardest to let go of, but I knew I had to if I wanted to heal. Through therapy and self-reflection, I began to understand that blaming myself served no purpose. I had made mistakes, sure, but I had also acted with love and trust qualities that weren't weaknesses but strengths. Eventually, I reached a point where I felt ready to face the world again. It wasn't about finding someone new or rushing into another relationship. It was about embracing life on my own terms. I started traveling, exploring places I had always wanted to visit but never had the chance. Each trip felt like a step toward reclaiming my independence, a reminder that there was a world beyond the narrow confines of my past. As for my wife and brother, their lives had taken a predictable turn. The fallout from their betrayal was as messy as I had expected. My wife tried reaching out a few times, through mutual friends and even through letters she sent to the house. I never read them. I had nothing left to say to her. No interest in rehashing what was already dead and buried. From what I heard through the grapevine, their relationship didn't last long. Whatever spark they thought they had quickly fizzled once it was exposed to the harsh light of reality. My brother's wife followed through with her divorce, and he was left scrambling to pick up the pieces of his shattered life. I didn't take any pleasure in their misery, but I couldn't deny the sense of vindication that came with knowing they were facing the consequences of their actions. The years that followed were a slow but steady journey toward healing. I learned to forgive, not for their sake but for mine. Carrying the weight of anger and resentment only kept me tethered to the past, and I was determined to move forward. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting or excusing what they had done. It simply meant letting go of the hold they had on me. I also learned to trust again, though it wasn't easy. Rebuilding that part of myself took time and effort, but I knew it was worth it. I surrounded myself with people who had earned my trust, who valued honesty and integrity. Slowly, I began to believe in the goodness of others again. Looking back now, I can see how far I've come. The person I was during those dark days feels like a distant memory, someone I barely recognize. I have grown stronger, more resilient, and more self-assured. The betrayal that once felt like the end of my world has become just another chapter in my story, one that has shaped me but doesn't define me. Life has a way of surprising you, even when you think you've seen it all. The pain and heartbreak I experienced have given way to a sense of peace and clarity. I've learned to appreciate the little things, to find joy in moments I once took for granted. And while I wouldn't wish what I went through on anyone, I'm grateful for the lessons it taught me. I've come to understand that betrayal doesn't have to be the end. It can be a beginning, a chance to start over, to redefine yourself, and to build the life that truly reflects who you are. That's what I've done, and I wouldn't trade it for anything.